This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. It's episode 729. This week we welcome Tony Havics, Dr. Cheri Marcham, and Jack Springston. Talk about the newly released second edition of the ACGIH Bioaerosols Assessment and Control Book. The long-awaited update revises the 1999 version that made such a huge impact on our industry. And before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. They're the reason we can continue doing the show. And don't forget, after the show, you can continue the discussion on afterthoughts.iaqradio.com. IAQ Radio Association sponsors are AIHA, the American Industrial Hygiene Association, at AIHA.org. IICRC, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, at IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, RIA, at restorationindustry.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA, at EIA-USA.org. Actionable Insights at getinsights.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus at particlesplus.com. BioPlanet at byoplanet.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
All right, the Z-Man's away this week. I'm going to take care of the trivia question, and it's a good one. This week's trivia question: who was the editor of the first edition of the 1999 edition of the Bioaerosols Assessment and Control? All right, so we've got Tony Havics. He's an honors graduate from Georgia Institute of Technology with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. He's a CIH and a PE with over 35 years experience in environmental health and safety, building science, and materials science consulting. He's also a longtime friend of the show. Dr. Cheri Marcham is an associate professor and program chair for Master of Science in Occupational Safety Management degree program at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. She's a CIH, a CSP, a CHMM, Certified Hazardous Materials Manager, and a fellow of the AIHA. She's got her BS in biology from Arizona State, an MS and a Ph.D. from the University of Oklahoma, the Sooners Health Science Center, Department of Occupational and Environmental Health. And Jack Springston, another longtime friend of the show, over 36 years experience in industrial hygiene and occupational health. He's been a CIH since '93, one of less than 50 active CIHs that holds the subspecialty certificate in indoor environmental quality. And he's also been a CSP since '99. Jack is currently technical consultant and subject matter for Atlas Technical Consultants in New York City and Long Island. I did it, and I didn't even flub it up too bad. All right. Welcome, everybody. Hey, Dr. Marcham, it's great to have you. This is our first chance, and I'm looking forward to chatting a little bit. I had a great chat before the show. 1999, long time. I was showing you guys before the show. I've got this marked up, the old 99 edition, and today I got my new one, and it came in, the second edition. It's out, long waited, looking forward to it. A lot's changed. But before we get started, let's get a little more on your background. Please tell our audience, they're familiar with Jack and Tony. They're not as familiar with you. A little about how you got started in the IAQ world and a little bit about the length and depth of this project.
Gee. In 1989, which is a long time ago, I started working for the University of Oklahoma as the Environmental Health and Safety Officer and the Biological Safety Officer. So in my role there, a lot of what the industrial hygiene function that I was responsible for was biological safety in all of those research labs with recombinant DNA and highly pathogenic infectious agents. But the other part of my job from an industrial hygiene point of view was responding to indoor air quality concerns and complaints, whether it would be mold or asbestos or inadequate ventilation or re-entrainment from from lab exhaust back into the building. So indoor air quality was a primary function of mine at the university. Let's see, the second part of your question was what?
Oh, just, let's first figure out, how did you get wrangled into, I don't know if that's the right terminology or not. You and Jack are the editors for the new edition here. How did you get so involved with this?
Well, I guess it was 2019, was it, when Don Weeks, our friend Don Weeks, came to the AIHA conference and was recruiting volunteers to update the book. And we all know it needed to be updated. I mean, it's a good book, don't get me wrong, but it lasted 25 years. But clearly, things have happened over time. We've had way more bioaerosol issues, H1N1, Legionella, SARS, COVID. We didn't have COVID at the time, but it was coming. And so he recruited a bunch of volunteers, and we had a bioaerosol committee that was reconvened in 2019. And I was elected chair and Jack was the vice chair. And then after 3 years, I said, nope, Jack, you get to be chair. I'll be vice chair. So it's been a journey.
Well, I had a feeling Don was somehow in the background pushing for this. He's another great friend of the show, and he's now that he's retired, he can push on these things. I noticed he also wrote the foreword in the book.
Yes, we asked him to write the foreword because of that. It was his vision.
He also wrote one of the chapters that you pointed out you thought was very important, was developing a sampling plan.
Absolutely.
We're going to get into that.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, there are now 27 chapters versus 26, and quite a few have been changed, or there's been some additions. Can you give us your key changes to the new book?
Well, there's been quite a bit. I mean, and as we talked about, the fact is life has changed over 25 years. The original book tended to focus on things like mold and tuberculosis because those were the issues at the time. And so there are quite a few things that we've added to this book, one being the recombinant DNA, another being bioterrorism. We did not have a chapter on respiratory protection and PPE, so that's been added. Within each of the chapters, there have been updates. For instance, Dr. Miller added some information on cannabis allergens. Who would have thought about cannabis allergens 25 years ago, right?
Right.
So we combined some chapters. Tony and I and several others worked on combining 3 independent chapters. One was on data interpretation, one on data analysis, and one on data evaluation. And so we thought, well, let's just put all of those into one chapter. So there have been quite a few updates. And to your point about there are two very important chapters. They're all very important, but 2 chapters that really expanded on was Ian Cole's on building assessment and Don Weeks on a sampling strategy. Because I know we have a tendency in this world to try to answer all the questions by going and taking a sample. And in the bioaerosols world, that's just really not the way you start. And so both Ian and Don covered the assessment process, and then if and only if you decide to take samples, what the limitations are and how to properly develop a sampling plan.
Let's bring Jack in here. Jack, you're the co-editor, editor, whatever your position was in this, but it was a big one. You put in a lot of work, and I'm curious what were some of the obstacles, I guess, that took 25 years, or were there no obstacles that just didn't rise to the top of the, importance pile?
What were the obstacles? You mean to writing it?
Well, yeah.
Well, as with any endeavor like this, what you find out is you've got people who like to talk but don't really write. And then you've got the people who will actually sit down and do the writing. I would say probably the first 2 years, we had some major struggles where we had people that committed to doing chapters, that said they would take things on. And a year and a half down the road, they then just said, you know what, I can't do it, and backed out. So it was a scramble to try to find, okay, how are we gonna do that chapter and write that chapter? And that was probably one of the most aggravating aspects, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, not fun when you have that happen. But I'm curious. I don't know how the writing of the chapters works, Jack. Maybe you could kind of give us a little insight on that. Like, does one person write the chapter, a group of people write the chapter, then the entire committee reviews it? How did you handle that?
Yeah, so when we first went through the book, as a committee, it was look at which chapters, and we selected like committee members to kind of head up for chapter developments or chapter updates, right? And then depending on the chapter, it might be just one individual author, it might be two. And some of our chapters, I think we've got 5 or 6 people who would update the chapter. Some of them were all new chapters, some were simple updates. But then it would have to go through the entire committee for review. The entire committee would review the chapters, make comments. It would have to go through that process. We would go through an editing, and then after the final editing, it would then go back to the committee again for, vote for approve that chapter, and then it went to the board.
Gotcha. Tony, let me bring you in here. You're another longtime friend of the show. It's great to see you. What do you think? What kind of stands out to you with respect to changes in this new edition and the importance of some of the new topics?
As you said, things have changed, or actually Cheri said things have changed over the years. I mean, right after the first edition came out, you had an emphasis on TB in the hospitals. You actually had a proposed OSHA reg, followed up by SARS-CoV-1, 2003, 2004. And that kind of started the emphasis onto some of the more infectious aspects of it, as opposed to the non-infectious aspects. I think we started realizing that we need to look at some of that or side of the public health, actually. And I think that's actually brought out in the book as well. Yeah, if you look at some of these chapters, you'll see it's not just occupational, it's environmental and public health. And there's more of a holistic approach to looking at both sides of the coin in terms of how the book is set up. This book is very well developed in terms of references. So if you go in and you try and you think there's not enough material in there, and you only have so much space to actually put some of the stuff down, and so you can't put everything in this. I think that's why Ian's chapter on how to do inspections and the like is really great, because it's practical. The rest of us, we couldn't go into that. We had to occasionally cover the overview of the material and then hit portions where we got depth. But then you've got all the references and all the citations. You can go find out yourself what's in the book. You can go look at those, get deeper into the material, and you've got a way to get there now without having to go do the research yourself.
It's a very interesting point that you make, that you included more focus, I guess, on infection versus other types of health issues. And I noticed like Dr. Hung Chung was a part of the writing, and Dr. Bernstein and several other doctors. And yet you didn't like ignore the mold, and you can continue to update that, the fungal and the remediation and all those things. I think it's going to be important for people to go back through and check what's changed from one edition to another. And I do believe that people are going to really enjoy getting a little broader look at public health, as opposed to just the focus on mold and indoor environments that people have had for the last 25 years. I think it's important. And of course, COVID brought a lot of that home. The hazard and risk assessment, Tony, hazard and risk assessment and characterization. That's a new, or at least a revision. Why is that topic so important to you with your experience as an indoor environmentalist? And how can we all do a better job when it comes to that topic, hazard and risk assessment and characterization?
I think it goes towards two things. If we look at the National Academy of Sciences paradigm, where you look at hazard identification, dose response, exposure assessment, and then risk characterization, it kind of follows along that route, which is a good route to take whenever you're working on any of these agents that you're looking at. And so it brings in that aspect of it. And the other half of that chapter is probably what I would call aerosol science meets infectious and non-infectious toxicology. We've oftentimes left out, the aerosol science matching up with where does it go, how does it transport, how does it get into the lungs, where does it deposit, and then why does that make a difference in terms of the endpoints and the like. So that chapter does a pretty good job of meshing all throughout those four steps: hazard identification, dose response, exposure assessment, and then risk. And there's even some equation in there. There's an equation on Wells-Riley, which most people, some people got introduced to as part of COVID. Some of us knew it was around for a number of years. And the idea of a quanta, most people have never heard of the term quanta before, which would be, you could look at it two ways. You could look at it as, what's the dose of an organism that's going to cause infection in 63% of the people, or has a 63% chance of causing infection in one individual if it's only one individual exposed. So there's things like, what are those equations? How can you tie it mathematically? What are the factors affecting exposure from generation to transport to fate, as well as, and that kind of leads into time distance shielding on the control side of it, as well as what are the susceptibilities you got to look at? What are the other confounding factors you need to look at when you're doing an investigation? Once you actually look at each of those and understand how that goes from point A to B to C to D, then you start realizing, well, I need to pay more attention to these things. I need to pay more attention to this, which is then why you go to the other chapters in the book and say, okay, for this agent, what do I need to look for? What do I need to spend time looking for this particular agent that may be not so generalized, but be very specific to this particular organism?
Let me just answer quick the question in the text. It's called Bioaerosols Assessment and Control, and it's the second edition. And it's kind of like, I don't know, it was the Bible to me back in the day, the first edition, and now this second edition. I want to get Dr. Marcham, I want to follow up on something that Tony said. The medical community. There was a lot of controversy between the medical community and the aerosol community and the industrial hygiene community over the airborne transmission of COVID. And I'm wondering, are you seeing a change in that?
Am I seeing a change in
the
coming to
medical
consensus?
community's acceptance of the fact that a lot of these some of these diseases, especially some of the viral diseases, are caused, the infection is through airborne transmission and not through other means more often than not.
Absolutely. And I can say that it's 2015. I remember this would be before, no, when was H1N1? That was 2009. In 2015, when I was at the university and I was the safety and health officer for physicians who were working at the Health Sciences Center and doing research, I vividly remember a conversation that I had with the chair of pediatrics, who said to my face, because I was trying to develop an infectious diseases policy to address all infectious diseases in the workplace. He said to me, I will never wear a respirator in front of my patients.
Wow.
And now we know that 95 respirators are exactly what he should have been wearing in front of his patients. And so there's been a huge change in the mindset, I think, in the healthcare community, and COVID did it, really.
Interesting. Let me go to Jack. I noticed in the prevention and control chapter, you worked with Dr. Joe Stebrook, who's a good friend of both of ours, and I was so happy to see him be a big part of this, at least that chapter. It's nice to see him contributing. What is different or expanded in that area, Jack?
Well, I invited Joe to help work on the chapter, clearly because, I mean, you talk about the cream of the crop as far as building scientists goes, right? And when we're talking indoor mold growth, mold is merely the symptom of the problem. It's the moisture, right? It's building science. How do we control that moisture? So I thought it vital to have him work on that portion of the chapter, right? And he contributed a bunch of figures and that makes the point a lot more clear, right? The original chapter, it's a bunch of written words, and when you read it, sometimes it's hard to grasp what are we actually talking about. One of the things that really got widely, or one of the topics within the chapter that got widely expanded was on the prevention and of Legionella in building water systems. The original 99 version had about 4 paragraphs. It's now about 4 pages. So we talk about decorative water fountains, cooling towers, potable water, whirlpools. So there's a lot more information on controlling Legionella.
Jack, I'm curious, you're in a big, heavily populated area there. You operate out of the New York City area, I think. Are you seeing more Legionella cases in your practice?
Well, we know Legionella cases have been rising and rising. Right? If you look at the historic data, because of COVID, I think a lot of cases got listed as SARS, right? COVID, instead of actually being Legionnaire's disease. We do still see cases rising, but it's way underreported. I mean, the amount of cases that are reported versus what is actually there, you're probably missing about 90% of the cases are not reported.
Interesting. Now, I'm just curious while we're on this topic. I believe it was New York City that put a law in place where they had to tell people, determine how many cooling towers they had and then have them inspected every so often. Has that been helpful at all?
No, we actually haven't seen any decrease in the number of cases. So New York City first passed their own law following the Bronx outbreak in 2015. And in New York State, right, New York City and New York State, they don't get along with each other. And New York State was like, oh, hell no, you can't write a law, right? We're going to write our own law. But the stupidity is that they only focus on cooling towers, and cooling towers are only a fraction of the number of cases that they're associated with typically the largest outbreaks, yes. But the mistake was focusing only on cooling towers. So, and the other big mistake on both of them is that they didn't have independent third-party verification. So the treatment companies can go, they treat the cooling tower, they do their own testing, and lo and behold, guess what? They never find Legionella. What you need is an independent third party who's right, who's there to protect the client, the building owner.
Interesting. Tony, there's a chapter on sample analysis, and it looks to me like there's a good bit of new information. PCR is one of those things that has really gained a lot of traction over the last 20, 25 years. What is important for our audience to understand about that sample analysis chapter? What are some of the new things in there that we should be aware of?
If you look over the past 25 years, you've seen a shift from culturable analysis to non-culturable analysis, and that could be in the 2 directions of both the spore trap and some of the PCR. So I think it's important to look at that kind of impact and what the assumptions and limitations that go into that process are, which some of that's spelled out in the sampling, some of that's spelled out in the data interpretation chapter. But the advent of PCR has helped with identification a lot, because you don't necessarily see it from the culturable side of things, but also we haven't really gotten into the quantitative common values that we have for some of the spore traps or some of the culturable stuff. So there's still a little bit of lacking there. You'll see that missing part, that gap in there. And of course, ERMI has its issues, and the book cautions against the idea of using ERMI outside of a research setting. And then there's also some similar caution on biomarkers with regard to mycotoxins and the like, just because we don't have good reference values. And so there's some good information in there on what's available. And we didn't mean to replace the AIHA book on lab stuff. We meant to kind of supplement it and provide somewhat of a different perspective on it. So it's a good overview. It hits some of the key aspects, some of the limitations, some of the assumptions, some of the things you may not normally think about immunoassay work, which is very important for, the non-mold area where you're looking at dust mites or you're looking at cockroaches, or you're looking at mouse allergen or something like that. So a lot of that stuff that people may not be familiar with, it allows them to get at least a little bit familiar with the technology that's out there and being used.
Got a text question. I think, Dr. Marsham, I want to give this one to you. What are the important aspects of this version for the serious industrial hygienist, environmental health scientist? What should be implemented first, and what will lead to changes in their work?
Wow.
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? Threw you right into the fire, didn't I?
Well, it depends. I mean, it really depends on what the issue is. I mean, that's the part of the book that is so important, is that there are so many different, as Tony talked about, dust mites. He even you didn't mention this, but we have a new chapter on algae that Tony wrote, right? We didn't. So it depends on what the problem is. And this book has everything. It has the assessment, it has the sampling, if sampling is appropriate. And I think that's a theme that you're going to find throughout the entire book, is that sampling is just a tool, and it's not the first step. It's just a tool in the evaluation, analysis and interpretation of those results. But also, what are you dealing with? Are you dealing with bacteria? Are you dealing with algae? Are you dealing with amoeba? Are you dealing with endotoxins? Are you dealing with fungi? What are you dealing with? That chapter is going to be important depending on the situation that you're encountering. So I can't say that there's, one thing to look at, although it just really depends on what you're facing. And that's the challenge in the EHS world, right? Is that we never know from one day to the next what the issue is.
I think that's an important, the theme can come through. If you're going to sample, have a reason for sampling and know how you're going to interpret your sample results. And I think there's a lot of information in here on those two things. I've got one more before. I don't want to get into the prions before halftime. Let's save that for after halftime, because I'm still a little confused on the recombinant DNA or RNA, whatever it was. Cheri, I'm going to have you touch on that after the break here. But I wanted to get back to Tony for just a second here. Tony, there's a lot of I think the key point you tried to make earlier is everything in here is documented back to a source of some kind, and it's all stuff that if you were to put into a report or to use on a project, you could then go back to the original source. And it looks like you had, you got a bigger book than the first version, but also the number of sources. How many do you know off the top of your head how many sources there are in this book? So I'm kind of leafing through
a lot.
thousands.
Yeah,
It's got to be 1,000 or more.
Yeah, well, I can tell you the chapter, I think chapter 3 breaks them all because it has over 400 references in just that chapter. Some of the other ones have 300, 200, 200. You've got a lot of reference material that's in there. And all of it has been looked at and used. I mean, the reason we cited them is because they're relevant to providing you the data that you need. Jackie,
How do you
expand on that?
Go ahead. How do you determine what is a citable reference and what is not?
Oh, well, there are some academic guidelines on what scholarly sources are.
Okay.
Right. So we clearly used an academic approach to this.
Yeah, one of the things we moved away from and the earlier book referenced a lot of conference papers. And we were like, a conference paper is not peer reviewed. If there was a conference paper that we liked and then a subsequent paper published, then we would cite that. But if it was just a conference paper, it's like, okay, no, we're.
And yet you still have probably thousands of references cited in here. That alone is a lot of work. I don't think people realize that just getting that list together and making sure they're appropriate is a lot of work. All right, we're going to stop and thank our sponsors here for halftime. We'll be back with the second half of our interview. We've got Cheri Marcham, we've got Tony Havics, and Jack Springston. Our association sponsors are AIHA, Healthy Workplaces, A Healthier World, AIHA.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA's multidisciplinary membership collects, generates, and disseminates information concerning environmental and occupational health hazards in the built environment at EIA-USA.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the oldest and largest nonprofit professional trade association dedicated to providing leadership and promoting best practices through advocacy, standards, and professional qualifications for the restoration industry at restorationindustry.org. Actionable insights, no more mistakes, no more missed line items in your Xactimate estimates at getinsights.org. Industry sponsors are Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. BioPlanet at byoplanet.com, improving human, animal, and environmental health with electrostatic spray technology and advanced chemistries at byoplanet.com. Actionable insights at getinsights.org. We're back for the second half. I want to jump right into it. Jack, you were the, I don't know if you were the sole author, but you were one of the authors, at least, on my favorite topic, remediation of microbial contamination. I'm wondering, were there many big changes in that area over the last 25 years?
David Krause, Dr. David Krause was the co-author on that chapter.
Okay.
So when we're talking remediation of mold, not really. I mean, essentially, you want to treat mold the same as you would asbestos, right? Under containment, negative air. It's not necessarily just because of the mold, but when you're ripping out stuff, you're generating a lot of particulates, right? And who knows if you have asbestos in the material you're removing. So from a mold standpoint, not really that big of a change. However, one of the things that we did in this book, in that chapter as well as in others, is stress that use of biocides in mold remediation, you should not be doing it. You're removing the material. Why are you trying to kill it, right? Why are you using a poison when you don't need to? And as you well know, there's a lot of companies out there that sell spray and pray, right? Oh, you don't have to remove it, just spray and walk out the door and pray it never comes back. Well, hey, guess what? It will. You didn't fix the water problem. But one of the things that we did greatly expand on in this chapter, again, on Legionella, because the original only had maybe a page or so about control of Legionella and cooling towers. We go into detail. David Krause went off on this one in detail on how to control in different settings. And we talk about one of the things that people don't probably realize is the pH of the water has a huge impact on whether or not chlorine is going to work. If your pH is above 8 and you're chlorinating, all you're doing is tickling the bacteria. You're not killing it, right? So, and we also expanded on the original chapter on remediation never really talked about how do you clear the area, verification and validation. So there's a whole section on that, not only for the mold, but we also talk about verification and validation for Legionella remediation. So the chapter's been greatly expanded.
I look forward to that. Like I said, I just got my copy today, but there's so much I look forward to reading in there. I got a text question I'm going to throw out for the group. What about indoor airflow patterns and the use of computational fluid dynamics in assessing the spread of airborne pathogens? Is this touched on in the book?
Yeah, I was actually typing into the chat and was going to answer that question in the chat, but you obviously picked it up. There's both classical equations and CFD are both discussed in Chapter 3 on the hazard and risk, and in Chapter 13 on the engineering controls. The CFD is a little lean, but it is mentioned, and there's a number of citations if you want to go further look at it. But there is some discussion of what those patterns are and what you can do to make use of those in terms of understanding the overall aspect of what that is. We also kind of discussed the difference between like a mixing approach as opposed to a push-pull type ventilation where you're basically doing direct work with the flow and compared to where the organisms are. So there's a little bit of that in there.
And I would imagine there was little or nothing in the original first edition.
Well, let me give you some more trivia. See,
Okay.
this is actually the third edition. Here is the first edition from 1989. Here is the second edition from 1999, and then you've got the new one. So it's actually the third edition, although it wasn't called the second. The first edition wasn't called the second edition. So there's some trivia for you.
I got you.
There's been a lot that's changed over the past, since 1989 when that first 3-ring binder came out.
Interesting. I will have to get that to Cliff, make sure he knows for a future show. We got another trivia question here. Tony, while I got you, there's a separate chapter now on engineering controls for bioaerosols. I don't think that was separate in the past. Maybe I'm wrong. Still include things like source, local, and full containment. I just thought that was so helpful to me in the past, teaching people the difference between those three things. And why did you separate out engineering controls from remediation, if that's what happened?
You have to ask Jack and Cheri how they separated it out.
Okay, all right.
But in terms of what's there is a separate chapter. It covers general ventilation techniques, covers the concept of filtration. How does it work? How do you evaluate the filters themselves and selection purposes? We have some UV light aspects in there. We got some photocatalytic explanation, bipolar, although we downplay the bipolar aspects just because of the lack of good data on that. So there's some good information on a lot of vent-based engineering controls, as well as some surface controls as well in terms of the UV and the like. And then there's a whole chapter on antimicrobial stuff that you could talk about for surfaces and other things as well, which is a really good chapter in and of itself.
Okay, so it seems like there's a wider focus than just on like mold remediation or something. You're looking at engineering controls for all types of bioaerosols.
Yeah, we actually discussed that in terms of not just your classical organisms of bacteria and fungi. We actually talk about some of the dust mite stuff as well as the allergens and the control of that, which does play a big part. Cheri talked about her role at Oklahoma. You're running a toxicology lab. You're dealing with mouse and rat stuff all the time, and that's a big deal. People don't necessarily think about that, but that's huge in the industry as to how do you take those into consideration.
Interesting. All right, now, Cheri, Dr. Marcham, I need to know, you need to fill me in a little bit on this whole idea of what recombinant and synthetic nucleic acids and prions or prions, I don't know. You tell me. It's a new chapter. What is all this about? When does it actually affect us in the real world?
Well, it affected us with COVID, didn't it?
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
It absolutely affected us with COVID. So coming from the university bio research background, I felt, and Phil Hawk, who helped write this chapter. I mean, we understand that recombinant DNA technology has been around for a very long time. Genetically modified organisms, the GMOs, are recombinant DNA. The concept is that you can take a gene from one organism and either express it or stop expressing it in an organism and create an outcome. And it's useful in laboratory research. If you want to see about diseases that are genetically imposed, you can impact that on research animals and then treat the animals to see if it will work in humans. And so recombinant DNA technology is quite useful, but it does make microorganisms that are different from the host organism, which then can affect the health effects, can affect the transmissibility, can affect the outcome, can affect all sorts of things. And so we felt it was important for people to understand what recombinant DNA technology is. For instance, vaccines. Sometimes you can use a less hazardous vaccine that's had its genetic genetic components changed in a vaccine. And so we just want folks to know that there are potential for organisms that don't act like organisms that they should because they've been recombined. They've had their genetic organisms changed. And mostly it happens in the laboratory setting. It also happens in the pharmaceutical setting. I mean, that is how insulin is made, is that they take the gene that creates insulin and puts it in E. coli, which is a microorganism. That E. coli then expresses the insulin, and it's extracted and used as a medicine. So in the pharmacy world, recombinant DNA technology is widely used. So there are several workplaces wherein you might encounter recombinant DNA technology.
And what about prions, preons? How do I say that first? And what are they?
Well, and there's just a little bit of information about prions in the chapter. Prions are proteins, I believe. They're proteinaceous. I don't know if they're protein, but they're proteinaceous. And they're really not well understood, but they can cause diseases like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. I mean, they can cause diseases in humans. And so again, primarily you're going to encounter that in the research lab, but you could encounter it in nature. There's just, some basic information about what prions are in that chapter, just to introduce folks to it.
I think it shows the wide variety of things that can affect us in this whole bioaerosol. And one of the newer chapters, and anybody can jump in on this one, is I can't remember the name, but it was bioterrorism, agents of bioterrorism, I believe. Who can jump in and tell us a little bit about what happened? What key points are from that chapter?
Well, I guess I've got to jump in on that one too. And the bioterrorism chapter is a compilation of what we already know about bioaerosols as agents of terrorism. We hope that it can be a good resource for first responders and for healthcare professionals to help recognize when and if it's going to happen that there is another bioterrorism event. And we have some typical bioterrorism agents in there that we kind of all recognize, but the physician who was the key author of this, Dr. Kornberg, wanted to lay it out from a health effect. So if you go there and you say, well, what kind of organism can affect the nervous system, or what kind of organism can affect the reproductive system, or the immune system, or the eyes, ears, nose, and throat, then you can look at that list and go, okay, it could be this, it could be anthrax, it could be tularemia, it could be smallpox. So it's a really good reference chapter for both healthcare professionals and for EHS professionals to help if we have a potential for another bioterrorism event.
Yeah, if I can interject and paraphrase something that Dr. Kornberg wrote in the chapter at the beginning. When you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. But don't forget, it could be a zebra.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, Joe, that chapter is really good because it takes this book right here, which is Dr. Franz's book from the military on bio and chemical warfare, a whole book, and condenses it down, and then takes a look over the past 20 some years since that book's been done and updates all the literature and then simplifies it. He does a great job of pulling together all that complex information and putting it into concise words and things that are actually much more readable for somebody who isn't necessarily delving into toxicology all the time.
Tony, I also, while I've got you, there's another new chapter. You separated out PPE, personal protective equipment, from the remediation. I think it was in the remediation the last time, but I'm not positive. What was the reasoning behind that, and what are some of the key points from that PPE section?
Yeah, so it actually started off as respiratory protection and PPE, and that's how I got into this book, is because Cheri called me up and said, "Can you work on this chapter?" And then I got sucked into 6 more chapters. Most of that chapter was actually really headed by Lisa Brousseau and company, and pulled together from their experience. And I can tell you that, it wasn't really there before. And since we didn't have a lack of consensus in terms of COVID, and the whole public health, people didn't know about hierarchy of controls. And now you can actually talk about hierarchy of controls because a lot of public health people have actually learned that. It's always been around for us. So it kind of was an idea, is to bring it in, talk about that. And if you look at it, there's matrices in terms of risk and exposure. So it takes a control banding approach to how you would select personal protective equipment and respiratory protection. There's kind of a feed off that's discussed in one of the other chapters with regard to control banding, and how Canada uses a control banding approach for respiratory protection of biological agents. Well, that's carried in here pretty heavily, and it makes a very good usage of, what do we know? How can we group them by hazard? How can we group them by exposure potential? And then we create a matrix on what's the risk, and then how we're going to control that. Which again also matches that National Academy of Sciences risk paradigm, looking at the dose response hazard identification, the exposure portion of it, and then we generate a risk, and then we control based off of the risk. So again, it goes back to that whole fundamental classical risk assessment, risk control aspect that you do in both the environmental, the occupational world, as well as the public health world.
Is there any
Because
discussion? Go ahead.
respiratory protection isn't just needed during remediation, right? It can be needed in a wide variety of occupational exposures, whether it's cleaning up pigeon poop or, whatever it happens to be, right? So, and although we didn't want to talk about it, I mean, there are no numerical values that we can compare to say, oh, we need a half face, we need a full face, we need a self-contained, right? And so that's why we asked Dr. Brousseau to talk about the control banding when it comes to what kind of respiratory protection, under what circumstances do you need what, because it's not as cut and dry as it is in the chemical world.
No, she's very good. We had her on the show. She did a great job during COVID. We talked to her about masks and respirators and the difference. And I'm wondering, do you touch on anything for medical people with respect to the types of face coverings they wear, or is that touched on in that chapter?
There's a discussion on elastomeric, versus filtering face pieces, and what the differences are and how they operate and the like. So that is discussed specifically in there. And then if you got things that are really related to a particular agent, you go to that chapter, and there may be some additional fill-in stuff with regard to that chapter that may be more specific for that particular agent. So there's additional stuff, not just in that chapter, but there is also some stuff within the chapters themselves.
Grayson, let's go to the roundup, buddy. He's on it. All right, let's round this up. I think there was one question I sent all of you, and I'm still before we get to that, Tony, when would a practitioner run into issues with algae or cyanobacteria, amoeba? Same question. They're covered in this book, but when would we actually run into that?
So let me hit the amoeba first. Probably less likely on the amoeba, but if you look at humidifier fever, eye wash stations, you could be running into amoeba with regard to those. And then there's also the slime mold, which, the classic case in Texas, where it set off a huge issue within the media in terms of this mold that recollected and came back again, which is actually, it's an amoeba, but it looks like a mold. It looks like dog spit up on your on some of your mulching and the like. That's kind of what it looks like. That's what it looks like to me. So the algae, although it's not as common indoors, there are a few instances where you can find it. Fountains are one. And then there's some other growth issues with like biodiesel production, where you're growing algae in large ponds, or if you've got algae harvesting for food, those can be, both of those are outdoor, but you can run into them there. And then probably the biggest focus most recently is in the public health region, where you've got these harmful algae blooms. The risk of exacerbation of asthma, breathing issues due to the algal toxins, brevetoxins in particular. Sanibel Island's now looking at regulations on how do they control some of this stuff, and when do you need to keep people away from the beaches, and how would you monitor it and do stuff like that. So it's becoming much more prevalent, much more recognized. And so with that comes the idea of trying to get some people a little bit more educated on algae before they go out there and find themselves with no place to go, because there isn't a good single source for some of that information.
All right. While I've got you, I would be remiss if I did not mention endotoxin. There's a chapter on endotoxin. I don't know if there was in the first book. Can you give us a little overview of why that was important to include and how it affects people out in the field?
Well, before I do that, I want to thank my co-author, Dr. Scott, on both of those chapters on the algae and amoeba, because he really filled them out and put some depth and some meat into them.
That's James Scott?
Yeah, Dr. James Scott, fabulous guy, very intelligent, very, very good understanding of the practical aspects as well as the research aspects, and also the naming, which I'm horrible with nomenclature. So it was great to have him around and be able to do some of that stuff. The endotoxin is important because we now have a proposed TLV for endotoxin of 90 endotoxin units per cubic meter. And since now that you've got something that's been proposed on a notice of intended changes, people are going to be looking to find out where does that come from, what data is available to help perhaps support that or not support that, depending upon which industry you're in, where you're at with regard to that. And so the endotoxin chapter is a fabulous chapter. It is probably, such a well-written chapter in terms of bringing all that information together and putting it in a readable sense and understanding the limitations of what the test is, what it does. It's a surrogate test, contamination on gloves that most people don't think about, and contamination in the testing process that could really screw up your results and confound them horribly, and you wouldn't even know it if you hadn't read the chapter. And so go read the chapter if you're going to do any endotoxin testing, because you need to understand how that analysis works, how the sampling works, what are the assumptions and limitations that come out of that methodology. So really, if you do any endotoxin testing, go grab that chapter and read it.
In a water damaged environment, Tony, is it accurate to say there's always going to be some kind of endotoxin exposure of some type?
Yeah, you're gonna have a myriad of things. I can pick up a tape sample and see mites. I can see the fungus. I can see the bacteria. So you're gonna have that. Anytime you got gram-negative bacteria, you're gonna have endotoxins. So anytime you find gram-negative bacteria, expect to see some endotoxins. How they interact and how important they are will depend upon the circumstances as well as the exposure potential. And so again, going back to the idea, before you ever grab a sample, got to have a hypothesis. So don't take a sample unless you know what you're going to do with it when you get finished with it. And one sample is not a statistic. Neither is one spore. So please don't think that one sample or one spore is that important. You need to have more data to be able to make good decisions. And forming that hypothesis is incredibly important as part of that process.
Now, I've got two good text questions. One is I just want to reiterate, we did cover the mycotoxin testing. It's not recommended in the book at all, Jack, or is it just only in certain circumstances? Whoever wants to jump on that one.
Oh, hell no.
Interesting.
Mycotoxin testing in the indoor environment is a complete waste of time and money.
Gotcha. All right. I don't think we can make it any more clear than that. And then we've got a comment to take humidifiers out of your home. I think,
I should probably preface Jack's comment by, these are our opinions. These are not necessarily the opinions of the Bioaerosols Committee or ACGIH.
Yes, thank you,
well
Tony.
done, Tony.
Yes,
well done.
Absolutely.
All right. So last question for everybody. What is in your, you're all very involved with this industry. There's been 25 years between these publications. What's the biggest change you've seen over the last 25 years in this industry? Dr. Marcham, let's start with you.
Oh, I knew you would start with me.
I'm sorry. You look like you were kind of.
I'm pondering, yes.
I'm
I don't
pondering
have a beard
little
like
bit.
Jack does.
I probably should have gone elsewhere, but let's do it anyway.
The biggest change, and we talked about it, is the fact that 25 years ago, the focus was on mold and tuberculosis, right? And now we have this myriad of just this plethora, this world full of biological agents that we are now aware exist, and they're all around us. And that's why this book provides all a variety of information on all that plethora.
Great. Next, same question, Tony.
Yeah, I think, if you look about 25 years ago, we were very insurance driven in terms of how the industry was focused on mold. We've now moved away beyond that onto public health. And I think the idea that we've actually thinking public health people have now been brought into the process. I think that's a big change. That's a really big change and a good one.
It is, and hopefully they'll work together in the future to, I mean, we're going to need each other over the years, you know. Jack, same question.
I would say the profusion of so-called certifications, mold certifications. We saw that this was happening back in the late 90s, people jumping on the mold bandwagon. But now we've got how many millions of people probably out there that are so-called mold experts because they took a 2-day class and passed the open book exam. Indoor mold is really not that difficult. As I think I mentioned before, mold is only a symptom of the problem. The problem is the moisture, the water, the uncontrolled water. So do we need all these so-called experts on mold? No, we need to control the moisture in the water, right? So I think that's probably, at least from my standpoint, we've got a whole lot of people out there that think they're experts on indoor mold, and they really don't know what the hell they're talking about.
And I'm afraid we're headed that way with this wildfire stuff too, Jack. Unfortunately, it's just I think that's a topic I hope a group like ACGIH can tackle at some point, because it's really it's making things very difficult for both the restoration guys, the insurance companies, and homeowners, because ultimately your homeowner's insurance is going to go up if we aren't careful about some of these things. And mold was a perfect example of what happened to homeowners insurance, and they had to exclude it. But anyway, look, last question. I want to go around the table real quick. Anything we missed that you'd like to add? Let's start with you, Dr. Marcham.
Are you?
I did it again.
I do want to thank, I counted there were 35 authors.
Wow.
35 authors. Imagining cat herding 35 authors. So you asked why it took so long. and to Jack's point, you know, we had some that just bailed after 18 months. So I want to thank all of the 35 authors. And I also want to make sure Tony's comment about these are our opinions and not the opinions of ACGIH, make sure everybody understands that.
Gotcha. We'll put that at the top of the blog.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us. And it was great to meet you finally, first time ever. And I look forward to having you back again. Tony, what did we miss? Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, the one thing I think we should add is that this book is just the beginning. The rest of it is for you to go educate yourself. You know, you can't put everything in a book, and you can work beyond that. I will tell you that we did do a Bioaerosols lecture series with, I think, 11 lectures. No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
10, I think.
10 lectures. It's available at ACGIH, called Bioaerosol Lecture Series, Measurement and Mitigation. It's a good series that gets an overview. I did one on microbial remediation, which also includes more than just mold. And so there's some really good information in there that I think lends itself further beyond the book, because it actually has somebody talking about it, leading you through it, and gives you some visuals.
Is that open to the general public or members only, or do members get a discount? How does that work?
The members get a discount. So the full lecture series is $689. If you're not a member, it's $551 if you are a member.
Yeah, I urge our audience to support ACGIH. They do a lot of great work, and by being a member, you can certainly help out the cause. Jack, before we go, any final thoughts?
The one that we've stressed before, sampling is not the way to go when you're dealing with indoor mold or bioaerosols. But an informed visual and olfactory inspection is key. And if you don't know how to interpret your sample results, then why are you taking them?
Well said. Well said. We had a great group of our audience, a lot of really interesting people on the audience today. High power, I'll tell you. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of downloads for this show. I want to thank Our guests today, Dr. Cheri Marcham, Jack Springston, Tony Havics. Great job on going over the Bioaerosols Assessment and Control, the second edition. I had in the title, It's Here. So it's here. Get your copy, read through it, mark it, and please follow it. Great job. Next week, we'll have, next week we'll be back with Mark Springer. Mark Springer for a show we're calling The Life and Times of Mark Springer, the Restoration Renaissance Man. And of course, before we go, I want to thank my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Slotnick. He'll be writing the blog. Grayson, Gone Fishing Fisher at the controls. And most importantly, our audience and our sponsors will be back next Friday at noon with the next episode of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.